I'm Dr. Angela McBurdy of DoctorFlute.com. Today's flute tip is on playing the first notes of your solo. Do you plan that very first note? I mean, we all know what we want to sound like when we're playing into that first piece on a recital or some performance that you're playing. And I know where I want to go with it, but that very first note sets the tone, literally and figuratively, of the whole piece. It's very important what you do on that first tone. Now, this opening piece that I played was the Mozart Concerto, and I don't know how many times I've heard this. Do you know what I did there? It's the very first note. The very first note. Did it sound okay? Yeah, it sounded okay, but it didn't have vibrato on it. Why not? Okay, oftentimes we think that note is like maybe too short to put some vibrato on. And so we don't put vibrato on it. It's just not anything that I think anybody ever thinks about. I will not put vibrato on that first note. It just doesn't happen. When you pick up your flute, you want your vibrato to be spinning as if you flipped a switch and it's going. So that when I play that beginning, that note has vibrancy and life. If I held it for any longer, you'd hear that, keep going. It would be lively from the start. If I start with no vibrato, it starts off dead. There's no life to that first note. And the quality, when it has a liveliness to it, is amazing. It sounds just kind of flat, and it might not be flat. It might be really in tune, but the idea is just that it's a flattened tone rather than one that has life and moves and lives with you. If I were to do, let's see, what if I'm playing Jade from Ferroud's three pieces. Now that first note is not long enough to have vibrato. What do I want with it? But I want to make sure that that very first note has presence. If I held it any longer than that, you would hear vibrato on it. I want to place that note, have the tone, know exactly what tone am I looking for. I like that tone right there. So I played around with it a little bit. I moved it on my lip. I played with the angle of my tone across this strike edge and wanted to, like, where do I get that best tone? And then every time I pick my flute up, play that. And again, I have the makings of a lively tone on it. It's not long enough to actually hear a vibrato, but it's there and a little bit longer and you'd actually hear it. Because if I start with that tone having liveliness and vibrato, it's going to start alive. Now what if I didn't? I don't want my piece to start on the half note D. I want it to start on that opening G. Could you hear a difference? Didn't it sound just a little bit dull and not alive? But if I start, they're even faster. It has life to it. You could tell you're excited for something that's going to come. Are there times where I might not want vibrato? Sure. The opening of Afternoon of a Faun, that flute solo. Most flute players start with no vibrato. Number one, it's a conserve the air kind of issue, but also because you're playing it for so long, you want to change the colors, and you're manipulating your vibrato and what you're doing with that that opening note. But you're doing it consciously. You're doing it because that's the color you want. That's what you want to create. If I start the opening of Fauré Fantaisie, now I started that time with no vibrato, but I was planning on that. I have, since it's a common solo for the intermediate flutist, it often is not thought about what you want to do with that note. And it often starts with no vibrato. And I would say it starts with no vibrato without any rhyme or reason. Now, I might want to start off with no vibrato, but I'm going to think about it. What if I were to start with vibrato? We often, on that A there, start with no vibrato as well. And it doesn't really make sense to not start. We need to start with vibrato, unless it's a conscious thought to not. But I would say more often than not, it started with no vibrato with no real reason, except that you just didn't put vibrato on it. Start with your vibrato going. Your motor is going right off the bat. It's really delicate, can still be very delicate, and you can crescendo a little bit through there. But when you start with that vibrato, it has life and movement, and it's going somewhere right away. Record yourself when you're performing a piece or practicing for a performance and say, are you really setting up that first note for what is going to come? Does that first note have a fabulous tone and vibrato and liveliness and color, and tell us what's going to be coming? So that first note, we sit up in our chairs and the edge of our seats and are excited for what is to come. Listen to yourself. Figure out, is that you? Or do you need to plan that first note with just a little bit more thought? And it can change your whole piece by doing that. It really can change your whole piece, because you now have a different attitude about the whole piece just from that first note. That's today's flute tip.